Okay, well, it's 11:33. I think we better go ahead and get started. And our program today is about catastrophic planning using the 80-20 rule for small and large companies. And we have sage advice from Bob Mason, Craig Dill, Michael Pedoni, and Priscilla Dakin. And while the remote is just that, remote, a catastrophe can wipe out a business. This presentation, referencing real examples, speaks to how to reduce the risk without inappropriately focusing on the remote, but allowing for the real possibilities. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. And Bob Mason. Bob, since retiring from the U.S. Air Force, has been helping supervisors and managers become more effective leaders who lead more productive teams. And Craig Dill. Craig loves getting his hands dirty, digging into the ugly business problems. Sometimes the problem is theft and embezzlement. Sometimes the problem is growth or people or systems. Whatever the issue, he gets positive results in seemingly impossible contentious situations. Woo! Sounds awesome. And then we have Michael Pedoni. Oops, excuse me. Michael has over 40 years of experience working with owners of privately held companies through his company proprietary methodology. Owners focus on what is critical to find resolutions. Now in semi-retirement, he is now more focused on helping companies in the developing world. And of course, our own Priscilla Dakin, in addition to her entrepreneurial ventures and work today helping entrepreneurs navigate the complex business sales and business value, Priscilla had what she calls her big career, over 25 years of healthcare as a healthcare executive with all the rigors of complex systems and unexpected events. And now I would like to turn the program over to Priscilla, who's going to help us with the program. Priscilla?
Thanks, Diana. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for being here. We are recording this, as Diana said, so you'll be able to reference it later if you or someone else would like to see it. Because Michael could not be with us today, I asked him if he would give us a short narrative on his view of this topic, and I am going to do a screen share right now for a very short video.
And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, please.
Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Priscilla.
Oh.
As you know, you and I are two of the senior members of the TAN organization. So we've been through some stuff in our lifetime, right? And you know, we're gonna have a conversation after you and I do this little piece about catastrophe planning. But I wanted to know why you think, in the myriad of things that a business owner has to deal with, why catastrophe planning is so important.
Well, Priscilla, it's important because of just what the name says. When a catastrophe comes, it's not a small thing, it's a big thing. And it has the potential to wipe out everything that you've built over years, even decades of work. So if you're going to put in all this time and effort and emotional investment and capital investment into building your business, wouldn't you want to spend a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, so that you can anticipate some of the things that could go wrong and create a plan that, should a catastrophe take place, will allow you to navigate that situation, get through it, and preserve all that you've built?
Sure, makes sense. And how much time should any business owner spend doing this?
Well, boy, that really gets to be a tough question, but you need to use the 80-20 rule, right? A catastrophe might not ever come. So you want to look at what do you think are the things you can most impact, meaning that you, through your own efforts, can protect against by having a plan. And then you want to put in enough effort to make sure that you have a plan and that it's doable. But I would use the 80-20 rule always. I would say, like, put some effort in, put the effort in that you need to get a good plan. Don't obsess about it.
Okay. All right. Good advice. Thank you so much.
You're
Have
welcome.
a great day. Hope you travel well. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
I don't know why it was frozen there at the beginning. At least it was on my screen, but at least we got going. Craig and Bob and I are going to have a discussion now, and we are encouraging you to put your questions in the chat box along the way. Diana will interrupt us when such questions show up. But also, would you keep track of the things that you might do in relationship to catastrophe planning to share at the end of this discussion? The next few minutes, we're going to discuss some good and bad examples of planning and readying for catastrophe. When we are planning for this presentation, Michael mentioned the success WEX has had, and many of you know WEX in Albuquerque, the success that they've had through the pandemic with multiple locations, management and systems. They found a way through, but it could have gone the other way. And they may not have been as nimble or well organized as thoughtful at the outset, but they made it. And Bob?
When Priscilla was gathering input for this, one of the other members mentioned the problem with having a business that can be impacted by a problem with one client or one industry. And I think this is a really important consideration. This actually happened to me last year when several of our potential clients dropped out because of income issues and meeting issues with the pandemic. And we were left with basically one client in one industry. And that's kind of scary. So it's a good idea to be thinking about that, if you're thinking about how to spread that out among so you're not stuck in that position. Excuse me.
Craig?
Well, Michael tells a story about a client of his that had a large contract that accounted for the majority of their business, of their annual revenue. And recognizing that risk, the management prepared a plan of specific actions if something ever happened to that contract, if that contract got delayed, or if it got interrupted, or if it just plain disappeared. And unfortunately for that company, a year later, after they made that plan, it came true. And they had a large interruption in this contract that accounted for the majority of their business. And they had built a contraction plan, a shrink to fit plan, if you will. And they executed the plan. They shrunk to their new revenue size, and they continued to operate. And a while later, my memory is that it took a year for them to get the contract back. They got the contract back, and then they were able to re-expand the business. But if they had not had a shrink to fit plan in place, they wouldn't have known what to do in order to survive that experience. So that's an example of somebody doing it right. Priscilla?
Well, Craig, I think you talked to me about someone that would, a business owner who would have an illness or a death.
And I do. I have two examples. I have, and I just call it the reality of life, death, and disability. If you're doing probability planning, what's the probability that the owner is going to pass away? Pretty much 100%. The only question is it going to be while they're still active, or will it be in retirement? So you need to plan for that possibility. So in this one case, the man had a single heir. He was leaving everything to his daughter. He did not involve his daughter in the business at all. He did not let her be involved in any way. And then on a Friday night, he had a heart attack and he died. And so the attorney for the estate called me a few days later, literally the day of the funeral. And I went in and did an evaluation for the new owner, for the daughter, to understand what she had inherited and how she could move that business forward. And I was able to give her a list of resources, especially a bunch of TAN people to help her with various parts and bits. And she was able to continue on with the business, but it cost a lot more. The second example I have is where an owner was descending into dementia, and it's a very sad thing. And the family was dealing with not only the fact that he had worked for 60 years to build this business, and additionally, their dad was dissolving away right in front of them. So I was able to go in and go through and do a brief analysis for the business to tell them how to replace all of his critical functions and to give them resources that they could use to replace the functions. And because of that, we were able to save his 60-year investment. We were able to preserve that business for the family. So that's an example of doing it right. And so my summary of what I feel about that is, if you have a plan in place of what to do if the owner's not available, if the owner is gone for any reason, whether it's disability or illness or just plain passed away, if you have that plan in place, if the owner has sat down and spent the few hours, I'm talking the few hours it takes to say, here's the 7 things I do all the time, and here's the person who can help you. Over here, here's a task I do, here's the person to call. If the owner does that in advance, then when the family is in the middle of a very emotional situation, a very difficult situation, they don't have to think. They just go to the plan and they execute the plan. And that's the beauty of it, is it's a time of terrible consequences, and yet they know what to do. And that always sends me back to Bob Mason. But I think I'm passing back to Priscilla at the moment, actually.
That's okay. Either Bob, me, one of us. When I was in healthcare, the healthcare organization that I work for, at least, and I think this is kind of a universal, does quite a bit of catastrophe planning, in the sense that if there's a big event like an earthquake or something, how are they going to triage patients, that sort of thing. And they're equipped with generators. If the electricity goes out in your city and somebody is on a ventilator, as we've watched over and over again in the last year, if you don't have a generator in place, you're going to lose that patient. So they put things like that in place. And this is the one that's maybe a little bit more gruesome. If you've ever had a doctor take off a wrong leg, you learn to have the patient mark the leg that is injured before you go to surgery to make sure that the right, correct leg comes off. And Bob, what about engines?
Yeah, I had knee surgery once, and I had magic marker all over my leg.
So, Bob, your microphone's a little bit not directed.
All right, I had moved myself away. Yeah, I love to talk about airplanes, and I think it's some good examples here. There are a lot of things that go wrong on an airplane, but seldom do. And some of them are more catastrophic than others. And as Michael said, you've got to look at what the real problems could be. And as an example, engine failures on airplanes are very rare. I mean, you hear about them, but they don't happen very often. But when they do happen, that's kind of a serious thing. You kind of like to have the engines running. So the engineers and the people that build the airplanes have carefully examined that and figured out what the best procedures are. And the crews are trained and they practice those procedures. Those procedures are clearly written out so that what really could be a catastrophe isn't as much of one, because they're ready for it. They have prepared for it, and they've looked at what the most serious possibilities are. And I think that's a good example in business. what is a serious thing that can really hurt you, and what can you do about it should it happen?
Diana?
A question for Bob. When you're talking about policies and procedures, sometimes those are all written kind of like the mission statement.
Mhm.
But how often do people really read those things and follow through on them?
I mentioned in the engine fair example, training. One of the things you have to do is you have to go back through this stuff from time to time. It's a good idea to review it every so often. I mean, whenever we went out to fly, we had to review our what's called boldface procedures before we stepped out the door. But you don't need to do that every day. Maybe every 6 months, maybe once a year. I don't know. But yeah, you got to review this stuff from time to time. Make sure the right people have access to it. Make sure nothing's changed. Make sure the person that has all the information is still there. Sure.
Craig, on my list, there is a comment that says head in the sand.
Well, it's an unfortunate story about a man who had spent his life building his business, and he took shortcuts with everything, unfortunately, including the digging trenches. And he was supposed to use a trench box that prevented cave-ins, and the OSHA had cited him for failing to follow that basic rule. And then he died in a cave-in because he wasn't using a trench box. And so OSHA fined him for dying in his own cave-in. But the problem came in where he had no plan of what to do about his business if anything happened to him. And it's a very sad story in the sense that he had built a business that had a lot of assets and a lot of value. And because he didn't plan, he ended up in his estate ended up in a situation where the professionals had to come in and close down the company and to do all the things it took to close his estate. And something like 80% of his estate ended up being used to pay bills that, if his heirs had just executed differently, they could have ignored those bills. They wouldn't have had to pay the OSHA. And they inherited a lot less money because they just didn't, he ignored the reality multiple times to the point that it killed him. And it's very sad, but it's real.
I saw, Diana, I saw in the chat that that you were asking about the WEX situation. That was really Michael's story, and had he been able to join us today, he would have told you more. But it is my interpretation that because of WEX being organized and deliberate about what they do and how they operate, that they were able to more quickly turn around at the beginning of COVID than some other restaurants were able to do. So doing takeout maybe more rapidly than some others were. I know that the Restaurant Association often calls on the owner of WEX to be part of their deliberation process and helping other restaurants. And I participated in some of those meetings this year, and it was true that they were always kind of a leader. And I think it's just being well organized. Craig, again, back to you. Focus on training and leadership.
Well, that's where you have to make appropriate choices based on the size of your business. So if you're a solopreneur and your business were to suddenly come to a screeching halt, I see this as kind of a kindness thing that you can do for the people around you. And that is, write down how you would shut down your business if you had to shut it down. Write it down. Explain where the bank accounts are, explain where the assets are, explain who the customers are and how to deal with the contracts, and do it as a very simple document. If you're, that's a solopreneur. if you're a small business and you've got 4 or 5 employees, you should have a conversation with the employees, and you should have a plan in place that helps your employees deal with the shutdown of the business, or the continuation of the business under new ownership. And you can turn to industry groups and associations. You brought up the Restaurant Association. These groups they've done the work. They talk about the things that you should consider, and they can help you a lot. And then when you get up to a really big company, that's when you get into having redundancies of employees, where you're able to have multiple employees do the same task. And when someone's on vacation or someone's out for health reasons, the business is able to continue to function. And that's all that whole cross-training thing. So it comes back to our 80-20 rule. In a solopreneur, what would happen versus what would happen in a giant company. And we all have heard the stories where the CEO of some big company gets killed or passed away, or is suddenly not available. And we know that those organizations continue, and it's because they planned for it. It's because they intended to continue. Now, on a very small scale, I have had the experience of a person who he created a book, and he called it his death book. And he was apparently a very blunt man. I never met him, but he was apparently quite direct about things. And he made up this little 3-ring binder, and he called it the death book. And in it, it had his will, his trust, the title to his car, the title to his house, and a copy of every bank account statement. Not every one copy of each bank accounts, so that the person picking up this book knew where he had money, knew where he had investments, and knew how to reach those folks. And that way, his estate has been able to be administered much more efficiently and saves a lot of money. As a side note, I think it's important to mention that you should also notify the various account holder, the various institutions you work with. You should notify them in advance of who is going to have authority to deal with things when you're not there. If you don't notify them up front, there's a certain large bank that has America in its name, and they absolutely won't let you have access. You can have all the documentation that you need in order to step in, and they will just kind of go, I don't feel like it. It's something you'll have to deal with. But if you notify in advance, it helps make a big difference. I'd like to toss in another example of where it was done well. And this was a pretty big business, a valuable business. And even though the father didn't allow his daughter to be involved in the business and deal with the business, he did have management in place. He did have good, strong management in place. And when he passed away, the business didn't have a hiccup because the business had all of the resources and knowledge it needed to continue to function. So that was an example of where the planning had gone into this pretty valuable business, and sales are up this year. So that's good for them.
Thank you. So it's really for any of us as individuals or as advisors or advising big corporations, we could make a difference by helping to recommend these things and also doing it ourselves.
Yes, and I feel it's an absolute kindness, because I know of an actual situation where the person passed away and no one knew where the life insurance policy, what insurance company had the policy. And they can't find any paperwork. They have no idea. It was a small policy. It was like $10,000. But the insurance company got to keep the money because no one knows who to contact.
I
One of the
One of-
reasons, go ahead, Diana.
I was going to say, one of the things that probably Keith and I have seen in our business is the buy-sell agreements are never updated. They write the buy-sells when the business first starts. It grows to a multi-million-dollar business, and nothing has changed with the buy-sell. And we've seen some catastrophic things happen to the person that may be a partner or a spouse even.
Yes.
So the buy-sells could be a catastrophic thing as well.
I worked on a situation in 1983 where they had a buy-sell and the 4 owners of the business, and they had had a good year and they updated the plan so that it was a really big number for the buy-sell. And then they had a couple of bad years, and then one of the owners passed away. And his wife was going to inherit 100% of the value of the business because that was the fixed price of the buy-sell agreement. And she was very kind to those 3 owners, but she still was wanting most of her money.
Too much.
Yes.
I asked, it was my idea to do this presentation, and I asked Bob to participate particularly because he has a variety of experiences, but certainly his military experience is one that has lent insight to some of the things that can be done that are appropriate for catastrophe planning. You have some aircraft issues, I think.
Yeah, I'm always talking about airplanes. And that's why she brought me on, because she wanted me to talk about airplanes.
I wanted to hear about airplanes.
But Bob,
right.
we all agree that an
yeah.
issue while you're flying in an airplane is a pretty significant issue.
It can be, yes. Actually, you'd be surprised how many things are going wrong on there that you never know about. Nobody will want to fly after this. Actually, what I want to talk about here, because we're talking about training and anticipation of a problem. When airplanes are built, the manufacturers, the designers try to anticipate what might go wrong. Talked a little bit about engine failure before. There are a lot of other things that can fail too. So they try to figure out what might go wrong, and then figure out what they can do about that. They identify those possible weak points. And I told you I wasn't going to go to this, but it's such a great example. The Boeing 737 and all the stuff that's gone on about that, and some of that was stupid, and some of it in my mind was almost criminal. But there was a system on that airplane that was a single point of failure. And the engineers knew it was a single point of failure, but they let it go. And it did fail. We have the same thing in our businesses. We have those single points of failure. You need to identify what those are. And as Craig and Priscilla have both been talking about, what are those failures and what can we do to try to mitigate the problem? Most of us as single owners are a single point of failure. And I really had not thought about this until we were going through this program and working, preparing for this program. Have you ever considered, if you're like me and you're pretty much the single point of failure, have you ever considered what would happen if something happened to you and you couldn't work anymore? What happens to your clients? Right? If you're halfway through a contract, which by the way, you've already been paid for, what happens to your client? What happens, what are they supposed to do? They're going to want either the rest of the service or they're going to want their money back. I mean, have you given this any thought? I had not. And so it's now something new I need to worry about. But bottom line on all this is, just like when they build airplanes, they try to anticipate what can go wrong in your business. You need to anticipate what can happen. Ask the what if questions. And when you determine where some of those single points of failure are, what are you going to do about that? Plan for that now, rather than having a spouse have to deal with it.
think that's a great legal question for Julie to ask if that contract is still legally binding on the spouse. I don't know.
Well, and I think there's an ethical issue there too. I mean,
If we could all mute, please. We get some feedback. Rebecca?
Okay,
Rebecca?
great. We'll be right up.
Diana, you can
Think
mute
you
her.
can mute her, Diana.
Yeah.
If you go
Okay.
to participant, you can mute her.
We can do that. And now, just to be clear,
Okay, got it.
So,
Sorry.
Craig, I have on my list next, I have resiliency, but Jonathan has asked us a question. Are there any general guidelines for business owners in economic downturns, such as which services to cut and which ones to keep? I'm thinking of the huge number of businesses that cut marketing after 2008. Diane will have to hide her ears here. Disastrous consequences. She's still smiling, I see. With disastrous consequences, and maybe Diane would like to participate in this, but I don't really know the answer, except that you have to think carefully about which ones would cause you the most harm. So it's not just cutting marketing. You have to think about what that would do. Maybe you have to change marketing, but not cut marketing.
Well, this is a description that I heard years ago, and it really helps me understand, because I walk into these situations all the time and people are like, we don't know what to do. The answer is, if you're in a boat that's sinking, you throw everything out of the boat. You literally start at zero, and you bring back into the boat the things that you need to survive. And so what would I say about marketing? Marketing versus advertising, first off, is very different. So my first step is throw everything out of the boat. And that means accountants, and that means employees, et cetera. And then you come back and you say, I have this much business. I used to have this much. Now I've got this much. Now, what will it take for me to execute on this and preserve it? And then what will it take to grow it? So those are the phrase that I use is you throw everything out of the boat, and then you bring back in only those things that will stay in the boat and not sink the boat. Because if you don't survive, there's no point. And that's where that client of Michael's, they threw everything out. They made the plan in advance. They threw everything out of the boat that wouldn't fit. And it's kind of strange, but it does come back to resiliency. Let's use an example. If you've got 10 employees and there's one of those employees who can literally do every job, and there's some other offsetting issue with that employee where they're not the best, but they know every job. Do you need to keep that employee? Is that the one employee you need to keep because they can do everything? Maybe they're grumpy every day when they come to work, right? Who likes working with grumpy? But grumpy gets every job done. So for me, it's a resiliency thing. Can the business shrink long enough to survive and then regrow? So should they drop marketing? It just depends. It's just going to depend on the circumstances. If that's what it takes to merely to survive, then that's what you should do, because then you can grow later. You can find the money later to reinstitute marketing. But Jonathan, I agree with you. You have to be continuing to do the marketing effort. It just may not be the expensive marketing effort that you were doing previously.
This is where the what if exercises come in though. What if we have an economic downturn? chances are there will be another economic downturn at some point in our lives. Because they've happened before, they're going to happen again. Are we going to have another pandemic? Well, we didn't plan on this one, but those are the kind of things you need to be asking yourself. What if we do have an economic downturn that affects my clients? What if I work only with the oil industry, in which case you're just silly. But and there's the price of oil plummets or whatever. Bad example. But anyway, that's one of those what if things. What if this happens? What might my response be?
And I can tell you, Bob, that one of the things that a person can do to make their business more resilient, if you're in the oil business or you're in the construction business, either of those businesses, when I work with them, I tell them, you're not allowed to have debt. You're just not allowed.
Right.
And you have to have a bunch of cash in the bank, because it's never an if there's going to be a downturn. It's just when. For construction and oil, there's always going to be those downturns. And my answer is, you're not allowed to have debt. Zero. You have to have a lot of cash. And there's a business that I worked with back in 1999, becoming 2000. And we were in the software business. And I had said, we need to pile up a bunch of cash. I don't know why, but we just need to. We just need a reserve fund. And when Y2K happened and the software industry went into a total crash meltdown, we had that great big mattress stuffed with cash to fall back onto. And that is its own form of security for your business. Yeah. If you have a large quantity of cash accumulated and something bad happens, then you're able to survive the experience and you're able to deal with it. There's too many people who think that they have to run their business lean because somehow that gets them the best return. And so Bob, oil and gas, lots of cash. You need lots of cash, and you don't need very many diamond rings.
Diane, by the way, put in chat that regarding marketing and advertising, you can always maintain a presence at little or no cost.
That's true.
I agree.
So that's kind of like Craig's throwing everything out of the boat and then bringing back the little things that you need to survive.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
One of our recommendations is that we search for the single points of failure. And you earlier talked about the loss of a CEO, Craig.
Yes. A CEO who sets themselves up to be the single point of failure is planning to fail, because everyone at some time or the other is unavailable for some reason. It can be as simple as vacation. It can be as complex as the person having a sudden disability. I've got many stories of the CEO having a heart attack and surviving it, but not being available for 4 months. Yeah. And they had to come back to work just a portion. And there's lots of stories of one of the scenarios that you can play out in your head is, what if you suddenly were in a car wreck and your business had to deal with the fact that you were unavailable for quite a few months? That's a great scenario to play out. So there are things that you can do with money. You can call Keith and buy a disability policy. And you can have that sitting in your pocket so that and you can do Key Man Life. And I'm betting, Keith, a person can buy Key Man Disability. Is that a true statement?
Yes, to a degree.
To a degree, exactly. Yeah. Everything has limits, right? And so you can put those things in place to give your business resiliency and to give yourself more time. I'm trying to see. And that does come back to the whole estate plan thing. We all think of estate planning as how am I going to retire? The truth is, I feel estate plans are what's it going to be like after I'm gone? Do I want to make it easy on my heirs, or do I want to make it into a giant festering hell? I like the idea of making it easy, making it simple. And that's what Julie will tell you to do. It's get the plan in place. The man with the death book planned that he would pass years and years and years in advance. And he did the work it took, the minor work it took to keep the account numbers available for whoever had to deal with his estate.
And I'm assuming he updated it periodically.
Yes, he did. I could tell that it had been updated within the last 12 months because there was only one new account that wasn't in the book.
And you mentioned earlier, Craig, that if you haven't filed these things in the right places, then it may not have done you any good. Like the bank that has the A starting part of its name. They literally, actually, for a trusted advisor member, literally rejected working with his documents.
Yes.
They weren't put in the right place, and so it was a mess.
Yes.
And if we love attorneys, we really don't want to spend our whole estate on attorneys figuring
Correct.
out that stuff.
Yeah.
And you can't really say that Mary is in charge. Mary's got to have a plan. If she's going to be the in charge person, Mary needs to know that she's in the plan, and she needs to know where the book is or what the rules are or whatever.
Well, that's a great point. When his attorney contacted us, his attorney said, "You will find the death book on this shelf in this closet." He was that meticulous about it. And I think it's just the only right answer is it doesn't need to be on the dining room table all the time. However, your spouse, your heirs should know where to go and how to deal with it.
Diana, did you put your hand up?
Yes, and I'm not part of the panel, but I have a scenario that that happened to Richard. It was his four brothers had a business in Ohio, and Richard talked to them. We both talked to them about buy-sell agreements, and they never implemented a buy-sell agreement. Richard lost two brothers and their mom and his mom within 3 months of each other back some years ago. It took over 2 years and a lot of family stress to get the two wives out of the business. And meanwhile, they had to pay the wives and pay their health insurance and so on and so forth until they were able to get back to just the two brothers owning the business again. So it's more than just an instantaneous catastrophe. Sometimes it could take years to fix the problem if you don't have those plans in place ahead of time.
Yes, and I do want to circle back and say that businesses of any size, bigger than us solopreneurs, businesses should have plans in place of how to replace every function. Mm-hmm. So if Mary runs payroll all the time and Mary doesn't make it to work one day, you got to have a way for the employees to get paid. Back before we could log into our computers remotely, there's one day when I had to drive through a foot of snow to go run payroll for the company I worked for.
Back in my days in the military, when they did exercises, they would kill people and see how the organization functions when those people are gone. And Priscilla's smiling. She thinks that's funny.
No. I'm smiling because there's people that aren't maybe seeing this and they're just hearing it.
Oh, okay. I have little quote signs up there. You can actually kill people. I mean,
they did not literally kill those people. You simulate killing people. And because guess what happens in real life? People die unexpectedly. And I think it's actually a pretty good exercise for you. If somebody
If somebody that you're depending on wasn't there, what would you do?
So for the benefit of our timeline, I'm going to move us on to the final segment. And that is talking about how you can plan for things you cannot plan for. Remember, we're likely only to be able to be successful at 20% of the catastrophes. And we love using Apollo 13 as the example of how to be ready. And most of you, if not all of you, will remember Apollo 13. Bob?
Yes, we're all old enough to remember that. But if you don't, Apollo 13 was one of the moon missions. In fact, it was the third moon mission. And shortly after leaving the Earth, they had an explosion aboard the spacecraft that was fairly catastrophic. Ended the idea of going to the moon and very likely was going to end the lives of the 3 astronauts. But it didn't. They were able to recover the spacecraft and the astronauts because, and by the way, this was something that had not been planned for. In all of their planning and all of their what-ifing the missions, nobody ever thought of this happening. And that's the point. There's always something that's going to happen that you didn't think of. But they had a team of very intelligent people, very smart people, and very motivated people. And with that team, they were able to come up with a solution. And part of it was because they had worked together so much. They had tried to look at everything. They were extremely familiar with everything. And so that team that was formed so well, that was made up of such good people, were able to come up with a solution that, while it didn't save the mission, at least saved the people involved.
Thank you. Craig?
Well, I know we're not here to promote ourselves, but the fact is that your management team within an organization needs to have resiliency and needs to be able to deal with problems. And the best way to do that is to train them. And there happens to be Bob on this call who trains teams on how to be resilient and how to react and how to deal with the missing people. And it might be a really interesting experience, Bob, if you were to have a training session with your next training session, have a red ribbon and go over and put the red ribbon on this person, on a person you pick out of the group that you're training, and say, now you have to function without this person.
Now that person. Good idea.
So definitely find your clients should be engaging people like Bob or Bob to train their teams how to react. Train the teams how to behave when something happens and who to turn to and how to deal with a bad situation.
So
That's right, because those people were able to fall back on their training, and they could be innovative because of the way that team was put together and the way they were trained, and the relationships they had built. And you all have a great source of those relationships too, right here in Canton. You have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge. Use that when you're looking at your catastrophe planning.
Jeff, I think you put your hand up.
I did. Thanks, Priscilla. You know, it brings to mind that larger organizations have, and we've kind of talked about this, but they have succession plans and they do it deliberately. And when I was with a larger company, we would have annual reviews of succession plans. And those were all about the question, the what if question, Bob keeps saying. But we'd say, you know, if you got hit by the beer truck, who's your replacement? You know, and folks needed to think seriously about those kinds of things. So you had that succession plan. But that being said, when you go back to Jonathan's question about what do you cut when the economy affects you or when your business downturn affects you, one of the things that gets cut a lot is training. And if you're not training people on your catastrophic plan, then you're missing a key ingredient that's going to come back to bite you in the butt. when you don't do that or you cut that. And so I think you guys are covering a lot of variations on the theme, the what if scenarios. And I'd like to hear from either all of you or any of you. I know companies have what they call crisis management plans. In your mind, do you differentiate that from a catastrophic event plan, or are they kind of the same?
I think it's same.
I think they're very similar, but they're going to have catastrophe is even bigger than disaster planning. So a lot of the things that are in catastrophes are disasters, but not all disasters are catastrophes. So I guess the example I can give is a bunch of your employees are sick, or everyone has to stay home because of a pandemic. What do you do if 10% of your staff is gone, 20% of your staff's gone sick, versus what do you do when 100% of your staff is gone?
I just want to add one thing here. And whether you consider it a crisis or a catastrophe or disaster or whatever, one thing I like to tell teams is you're going to deal with that with the team, with the plan, with everything that you had yesterday. It's too late to do all this when it happens.
Yeah, and I think keeping people in the organization, maybe everybody in the organization, at least vaguely aware that these plans are available. And there are systems, and that if something's happening, even if you are not high up on the chain, you can have an impact by going to your supervisor and saying, this is going on, or how do I do this? And, where's the fire alarm, for heaven's sakes? It's everybody. Diana?
And speaking of fire alarm, what happens if there's a fire and all of your client files get destroyed? Is that a crisis or a catastrophe?
That's a failure to plan. That's a failure to plan, because we have all just now seen what happens when a pipeline company turns off the gasoline because they didn't have redundant IT systems that were isolated from the rest of the network. So, I mean, it's there. Some of this you put down as failure to plan, because who doesn't know about some company in the news who's gotten hit with malware now? Now to me, it's like that. Let's back up and just say, today, malware has become normal operating. You'd better be ready for it. Unfortunately.
I'm gonna stop us now, because we're down to the last couple of minutes, and there are several people who weren't part of the panel. Some of you have spoken up with questions in chat, etc. But when you think about this discussion, what do you think you might do differently for yourself or your client going forward? Don't raise your hands at once. Jeff?
I think what I would consider doing that I have not put into motion is, I have colleagues that are kind of in my universe of profession and who do work like I do. And I think my clients, especially my long-term clients, might benefit from, if something happened to Jeff, who can I turn to? And I could provide them with a list of potential names of folks who could provide the services if I wasn't able to, So that would be a way to mitigate some concern or question from my clients who go, oh, well, gee, I didn't expect him not to be here now, or not be able to do whatever he was doing. And so giving them an opportunity to know that there's somebody who can step into my place would probably be beneficial for them, put them at ease.
Jonathan?
Yeah, likewise, I'm realizing, thanks to Bob, that I am a single point of failure in my own business. And it's making me feel a little bit embarrassed because when I worked for a larger company who was a home builder about 12 years ago, I had put together something that showed the procedures of everything I did. And the title of the book was a joke. It was called Zap Brannigan's Big Book of War. Anybody that's watched Futurama knows what that means. And it was very beneficial because I got into a motorcycle accident and I was out for like 2 months, and they were able to keep doing the stuff that I did. So yeah, my change is going to be, put one of those together again, put a death book together. I also need to think about this for my clients because I'm watching one of my big clients go through a very tough time. And because we're resilient and resourceful and know how to scramble, the business hasn't failed. But I don't want to do that again. So we need to have a plan for dealing with this kind of black swan event. Or maybe even just your run-of-the-mill economic downturn, so that the next time we don't all have heart attacks at the same time.
Diana?
I think one of the things that this discussion brought to my mind again is in our business is to ask the question, when was the last time your buy-sell agreement was reviewed? And also to ask them, who brings in the revenue? Is it the CEO or is it their top salesperson? And how are they taking care of protecting them so the business survives?
Ed, I think maybe your hand went up. I think that's Ed sitting out there, right?
Sorry. Yes, it is. Yeah, my lighting's not very good in my conference room, but appreciate that. What's interesting is, this talk about disaster recovery and catastrophe is kind of an enterprise risk management discussion. And what I find, of course, that's what we talk about with our clients a lot. But I find most of our clients are, they're all focused on, like to your point, Craig, everybody's getting hit by cyber. So we talk about these little silos of risk. We talk about, we talk about, whether it's property in a wildfire zone, or if it's a cyber risk, or, maybe whatever little piece of insurance might have gone up. But it's really hard to get our clients to look at the giant overarching picture, which rises to the level of, enterprise risk management, disaster recovery. They're all focused on those little pieces. And so one of the things, and we can help with disaster recovery plans or but a lot of, creating a conversation to make them interested in that, I think is something I need to do a better job of. And it'd be interesting to get your perspective on how do you get your clients from focusing. They're all so busy and they have so much on their plate. And usually what they're focusing on is maybe what's right in front of them instead of what's further down the road or big picture, and to try to get them to back up and put some of these overarching programs in place is
I kind of
a
wonder,
challenge.
I wonder if there's for someone in your industry, Ed, if they're going to put that insurance plan in place, which is a really good thing to do, to ask the question, now what's the internal mechanism within your organization to manage the risk to avoid this, or to make sure someone knows the insurance policy that is there to begin with?
Yeah, who they've shared it with, right? Who else is aware of the program? Yeah, good point.
One of the things that's triggering for me is that I'm actually the disaster person in this one company that I deal with. And literally their disaster plan says, if the CEO is not available, call Craig. But the problem I have is I don't know all the things I'm supposed to be going to be requested to do.
Right.
So,
Where's the death book?
So in fact, I need to reapproach that client and go back to the client and say, okay, we're going to have to spend a few hours because I need to know what I'm going to do if this happens. So,
yeah.
So they've done the first part. Now it's time for the next shoe to drop.
Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to add? We are slightly beyond our time, and I'm imagining that we are ready to stay if you have other questions or concerns or comments, suggestions.
Very good.
Diana, shall you say goodbye to us?
Yes, thank you very much, everybody. It was a great discussion. It had a lot of food for thought for me on what I should be doing a little bit better job of explaining maybe what I do instead of trying to make myself so different, and really focusing on the client, saying, you know, what kind of planning have you done?
Mhm.
So thank you all very much for your time. We appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.